Welcome to the Creation of Living podcast. I'm your host, Heather Nichols, and I'm delighted you're here. Join me for conversations and inspirations for creating way more in every area of your life and living. Welcome, everybody, to the Creation of Living podcast. I'm here today with the lovely and wonderful Miss Mary Case. Mary is an access consciousness facilitator who also facilitates the specialty areas within access consciousness of joy of business, XMen, and she's also a 3-day body class facilitator. She is a triathlete and a retired elementary school music teacher and she did that for 37 years in Canada, and just a lovely being. And I'm really happy to have you here today, Mary. Thanks for coming.
You are so welcome, and I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah. And we actually were, it was like, well, let's just talk about bodies and business and creation and XMen. And for those of you guys who are like, XMen, what is XMen? XMen is a specialty area of access consciousness that really it is, we dive in a lot to different disabilities and, looking at people who have diagnoses in different, like whether it's mental health or sometimes genetic things going on, things with their bodies, and looking at how those diagnoses, those labels actually are, they're made in this reality to be about like sort of the wrongness of somebody that needs to be corrected. But from an XMen point of view, we see all of these things as people's superpowers, and really the broad conversation and the overarching conversation in XMen is really, what if everything that you think is wrong about you is your strongness and actually the brilliance of you, and how different are you actually, that if you didn't try to be like everybody else and you didn't try to be normal and fit in, you could actually tap into your superpowers very dynamically and create something that's never been created before. And this is a conversation that I love to play with in business and with bodies. And to me, they all go together.
It's so true. And it's just an amazing conversation about like, what if everything you decided like was messed up about you or was wrong about you with your body, with your business, with how you create, with how you function in the world? What if everything you decided was wrong was actually strong?
Yeah.
Like, what if that is actually what makes you different, is what makes you brilliant?
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us a little bit of your story, Mary, with all of this. Like, yeah. I mean, I know you worked with kids, and so that was part of the entry into this world of XMen. But what about you? Like, because I know for me, I was like, oh, that doesn't really apply to me. And then I went, oh my God, it totally applies to me. And then I started applying it to business and my body and all these different areas of life. And it was like, oh, wow, this is really different.
Yeah, it was the moment where I realized that I was this XMen, like whatever that was. And I had done some trainings with Access Consciousness about XMen, and it was all about, I wanted to be a better school teacher. So that was my professional development. And the information was amazing. And I realized that it was information that I really already knew and had been functioning from my whole teaching career. But I wasn't really getting that I was that. Right. So we would talk, let's say, for example, about ADHD, and these kids are ADHD, and there were all these labels around attention deficit. And, what do we do with these kids? And for me as a school teacher, was like, yeah, send them to me, send them to the music room, not a problem. Like, I could never see ever that there was a problem.
Of course, that's the wrongness of you, right?
Yeah, so that became
I
the
can't
wrongness
say
of
there's a
me
problem.
that, yeah, these kids require detention, so we're going to send them to the music room so, Mrs. Case can do the detention, and then we had a great time together. But I was able to see the brilliance of these kids.
Yeah.
And the big part of this is when we're letting go of all the judgments. So I had no judgments around these kids, and they have a sense of that. Like kids know, adults know when they're in the space of no judgment, which is
Yeah.
rare.
Yes, it is. And this is really interesting because, you and I have had some communication around my son and what's going on with my son right now. And because I have a 13-year-old who is a dynamically an XMen, dynamic XMen, and really doesn't desire to be different. He's way more interested in this moment in being a normal teenager that fits in, which is, of course, that's part of how it goes for teenagers for the most, a lot of teenagers. But he's way more interested in that than in, recognizing how different he is, how aware he is, how dynamically he picks up on everything around him, And it's been interesting as a parent, having this kid, and I've got all these tools and all this information, and he doesn't really want it, at least right now. And also interesting that, like, I don't, like, I provide this sort of space with him, like I do provide this space with him, and that's always been sort of how, like, my household is very spacious. It's very quiet. It's very energetically sort of just, there isn't a lot of judgment. There isn't a lot of control. And it's so interesting right now to see how much he's actually pushing back against that. He'd rather be in an environment where there's a lot more noise and a lot more judgment and a lot more of all of that stuff that makes you normal, and it's, as an XMen myself, it's been so interesting to go, like I could go into the wrongness of me because I'm like the main problem in his life right now. And I can see, like, how I can just, there's so many things I'm seeing of, like, how other people have put that point of view in his world, and he's aware and all this stuff. And so it's interesting to just, I don't know why I brought that up, it was just what popped, but it's like sometimes when we be that level of space, like, some people really love it and they find it very nourishing, and they find it very, sort of like being on a beach and looking at the ocean, the sense of, like, relaxation. And some people really don't know what to do with it and have a hard time with it and make it wrong. And this is where, as XMen, we can go into the wrongness of ourselves, but if you actually really acknowledge the difference that you're being in the world, it creates a totally different reality.
Yeah, and as an XMen parent, being willing to empower your kid to go through that,
Yeah.
to you provide that space, and the child, the young teen, even young adults may not be ready to receive that. So it's very common for the XMen teenagers to reject everything, the information. I mean, we're talking two situations here. One where they've been given these brilliant tools of, like, what is an XMen, and been told that they're not broken, that they're not wrong, that different's okay. And yet there's still this desperate need to fit in with their friends, with the way things are done in this reality. And so what Heather offers here, what you're offering here, is that what we're calling space of no judgment, where, it's okay. Your child is going to maneuver their way through all of that. And for XMen kids, there can be a lot of turmoil.
Yeah.
It's not, in Access, we have this expression, all of life comes to me with ease, joy, and glory. It doesn't mean easy,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't mean easy.
Huge
So what
difference.
does it take to maneuver through all of this? And it's a very difficult playing ground for parents, can be, to maneuver through that with ease.
Yes. True story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for everybody, I mean, I'm so grateful for this conversation, and really, kind of extrapolating this into what is going on in the world right now. There's a lot of this like pressure to fit in and to be good and to override what and to override your body and to override, so that you can do the right thing. There's a lot of messaging around like, do the right thing. It's your responsibility to do the right thing. And it's just when you're aware of way more than you realize.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff coming at us right now, and you can, well, I guess, okay, so like two XMen get together on the Zoom and there's 18 million different universes that explode.
We're in like 25,000 universes here.
I know, totally.
And I'm in Heather's head, and Heather's in my head. It's like,
this is so great.
Yeah. But it sounds like we're kind of getting to that with XMen, and for a reference point, we're going to say like ADD, ADHD, OCD, autism spectrum, like we're all in there somewhere. And
a lot of people,
right, are in there somewhere, and it's about awareness.
Yeah.
Like,
okay, so talk about that, and I'd love to go there and play with like having the ease, joy, and glory. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that is the mantra of Access Consciousness. All of life comes to me with ease and joy and glory. And it doesn't mean, it's not this airy fairy, oh, everything's easy, and it's funny because that's the only mantra that we use. We don't really use mantras in Access. Like, it's not a major tool other than this one, because it has this energy to it. And so having this awareness of universes and, the ADD, ADHD, OCD, autistic kind of tendencies, and then having ease, joy, and glory with that, no matter what.
Yeah. And that part is the choice. We have this choice to enter into the trauma, the drama, the angst that can come with all of this, or we can choose to acknowledge that we are aware. So we are incredibly aware. Your son is incredibly aware of all the points of view of all the kids around him in the teenage world. We are incredibly aware of all of the points of view that are out there right now about all of the trauma and drama that's in the world. Yeah. So we're like these little psychic SpongeBobs that are picking up on all of that all of the time.
Yeah.
So when we start to get that we're aware, and that actually 99.999% of our thoughts, feelings, and emotions are not actually ours. We've picked them up from somewhere. When we're starting to acknowledge that and be aware of that, then our bodies have a space. And we've been talking about like how this is for our bodies. Just acknowledging that creates a little bit more ease in the body, expanding out, less contraction. It's not mine. It's not mine. It's not mine.
Yeah. Yeah. And and this is where, if we look at like when you have this kind of psychic SpongeBob thing going on, and you're super aware, you're aware of actually, like, because one of the kind of qualities of XMen awareness is that there isn't a sense of time, there isn't a sense of linearity. So and you can look at this like with autistic people, they don't have a sense of like, tomorrow. Or, I mean, even my son said, this is one of my favorite things that he's ever said to me. He was this just ridiculously adorable little munchkin. And I mean, he still is like, it's in there. But he was probably like 4 or so. And I was saying something about, oh, we're going to do blah, blah, blah tomorrow, and he looked at me and he goes, Mommy, the only day I know is today. And I was just like, oh man, the mouths of babes. I mean, it was just this beautiful moment, but that is actually how XMen function is, and it's not that the only day I know is today, meaning like I don't have a sense of the future, or I can't remember the past, but it's like there is like the linearity that people tend to live by, that it's like where there's this, it's like your past determines your future and now determines your future. And if all these different ways that people look at past, present, and future, for XMen, it's just the lines are very blurred with that. And that's a capacity, but in this reality, you could look at like, one of the characteristics of autistic, people is that they can't see what their actions are going to create, in the future or whatever. It's like, well, what's the capacity there, and when we can start to really see the beauty of that, like really being able to function from the spherical awareness that all of that is, it, like, if you try to put it through the lens of linear reality, there's just this tiny amount that becomes available. But if you go, I'm going to look at this from a completely different perspective, a completely different way of functioning, then all of these universes open up. And the ease, joy, and glory of that with your body or with business or whatever, all of these different areas, like, really starts to expand.
We weren't sure where this podcast was going to go. It's so amazing.
That's
Two
really cool.
Two body people, two XMen people on a call together. It's amazing. And I just love how we've jumped into this whole idea of past, present, future. I mean, there's no separation here. And that's the thing with XMen, with ADHD, with OCD, with autism, like the young adults I work with autism, you see, there's no separation there.
Yeah.
And there's no linearity.
Yeah. So talk more about that. Like what have you seen? How have you seen people have more of that ease, joy, and glory by like stepping into the capacity that is, rather than the limitation? And it could be you, it could be your clients. Like what? I'd love to.
But I think for me, working with nonverbal autistic young adults, they don't really have a problem per se with that. It's the caretakers, that, or what we might define as therapists, that have a problem with the way that they're functioning. So for me, as a XMen facilitator, with a different set of what we call tools to work with, and being willing to see, and I couldn't see this if I wasn't an XMen, if I didn't have these capacities, I couldn't see this, but it's so willing to be present with nonverbal autistics and have literally conversations without talking. So that art of nonverbal communication starts to open up miraculously when you start to see that there's no separation. Language itself is actually a limitation, and we are way more than all of that.
Boom. Well, and I love the thread of the ease, joy, and glory that's weaving itself here, because the ease, joy, and glory that's available there is immense. And this is, imagine you're totally psychic and you're picking up on the thoughts, feelings, and emotions of everybody else. You don't have a sense of linearity in your world. Like you have to actually effort to try to do that. And you're also just dynamically, I mean, this is an energetic world. And, you know, I was just saying this to somebody this morning, whether you know it or not, you know, like this, everything is energy, whether you recognize that or not, whether you function from that or not, whether you believe that or not, you know, everything is energy. And so, and for an XMen, that is incredibly true. That's their world, you know? And so it's like putting yourself into this sort of like the slipstream of how things actually work in the universe and also in the world on planet Earth, you know, gives you this incredible advantage where all of a sudden you've made available to you the like underpinnings of everything, energy, you know, and your awareness, and, you know, talk about like what you can create with your business, with money, with your body, all these things, you know, all of that becomes dynamically available to you when you go, this is my primary language. Energy is my primary language. Energy is how I function. I don't actually need language in a lot of ways. And I mean, this podcast is, to me, like what we're saying is, you know, about 1% of what's actually going on here. You know, I'm like, wow, this is really cool. You know, so it's just like, it really does give you the universe of ease, joy, and glory that we know is available. And part of that is you got to be willing to function really differently from the rest of the world.
Very different.
Yeah.
Very different. And a willingness to, like Heather says, to choose that, to be that.
Yeah.
And that it is sometimes feels a little bit weird. You know, like it felt weird for me for a moment as I realized that there's XMen kind of tapping into this particular call that we're having, this podcast we're calling. It's like there's a happy dance going on, that we're getting this information out.
Yeah.
I mean, that is weird.
Makes me happy.
Makes me very happy. And the
Yeah.
thing is, we talk a little bit about bodies. It makes my body very happy.
Yeah, me too.
Because we're acknowledging something that exists that's really, really different.
Yeah.
And energy is our first language.
Yes, it is. And, you know, I love that you said we're acknowledging, you know, something that exists that's very different. Because when you acknowledge something, it gets to be more, you know, it's sort of like one of my favorite quotes from Dane here, who's one of the co-creators of Access Consciousness, is what you don't acknowledge doesn't exist. So this whole universe of energy, and, you know, it's like, you don't acknowledge it, it doesn't exist for you. And it also exists less in the world in general as something that's available to people, you know? And so as we begin to acknowledge this, and, you know, it's like, I just keep thinking about one of the conversations we've had lately in Access Consciousness is like, in a way, it's sort of like, it's time to actually get as weird as we are. You know, it's time to be, and that's one of the things that I'm really marveling at with this conversation and the energies here is like, oh, cool. You know, we talked before we came on and you said, you know, who's the audience for this? And I was like, everybody, you know, like we could be speaking to people that know these tools already and know these conversations already. And I'm sure some of those people will be listening. And it's like, no, this is for everybody. And to perceive where we're going and the spaces and, you know, what the conversations that are able to roll off of our tongues it's really cool. You know, it's like, wow, it really is time to be as weird as we are, and even weirder than we've been willing to be. I mean, I don't imagine that anybody in the world right now I really don't imagine that anybody would say that the world is really working at the moment. You know? And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing that you've always done and expecting something different. That's not how it works. So I think we may just leave it there.
Beautiful. What a beautiful conversation. I'm so grateful to get this out there. It's funny, I found the same thing when I was working with my XMen kids in school. There was such a sense of relief from what we're going to call XMen, that this information is actually getting out there. Because they know this stuff. They know they're weird.
Right.
And different.
Yeah.
And to be acknowledged for their difference and the brilliance of their difference is such a gift. So there's like all these XMen out there doing these happy dances.
That's so cool.
And I keep talking about kids and adults, adults, absolutely. And Heather's an XMen, I'm an XMen,
Yeah, totally. And yeah. And, we've both really used these tools dynamically in our lives, like with our bodies and being athletes and, in our businesses and how we create. It's like, and that's, maybe we'll just have to have you come back and we'll talk more about those areas.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Because we tend to get like all serious stuff, sometimes talking about this stuff. And then I forget. It's like, oh yeah, I play as an XMen all the time in my sport as a triathlete, as a professional musician, like in my relationships at home with my kids. Like it's also a great playground. Yes,
it is an amazing playground. It's yeah. True story. Cool.
I think a future chat about sports would be amazing.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that for sure. So part 2 coming at some point. So how can people find you? And we'll put the links in the show notes as well.
You can find me on Facebook. Mary Case Energetics is my business page. You can find me at www.marycaseenergetics.com.
Cool.
That lists all my classes and all the things that I'm creating. If you go into that website, there's also, you can sign up for the art of nonverbal communication. There, if you'd like a little bit more information about that.
Cool.
And you can usually find me in Messenger on Facebook.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, lovely lady. This has been like super nourishing for me. So, and I am also very excited about getting this out into the world. Really. Yeah.
You are so welcome, Heather Nichols, and you are such a gift. Thank you.
Back at you. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining me for the Creation of Living podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it and leave me a review. If you would like more, you can find all kinds of resources and upcoming events at heathernichols.com. Until next time, remember, my beautiful friends, the world thrives when you do.